Hello, my name is Jeremy, and this is the Hermod from Squarp Instruments. Hermod at its heart is an 8-track CV and gate sequencer for your modular system with advanced effects, pattern chaining, and all kinds of goodies under the hood. It is quite literally the brain of my modular system, sequencing all of the melodic instruments in my rack, as well as providing modulation to them and to itself. In this video, we're going to go over a little bit of what makes Hermod special, how I use it, and all that good stuff. Let's start off by listening to what Hermod sounds like. It's a sequencer. It doesn't sound like anything on its own. But here's some examples of what it can do in a system. Since getting the Squarp Hermod, I've been really pushing it through a lot of different genres, from pop music to ambient to downtempo to glitch, to see if it is the right sequencer for me. And it's performed pretty admirably in all of those genres. In this particular performance, I am pushing the internal effects of the Hermod to their limit to have every single sequence involved extremely generative and mutating on the fly without me having to touch anything. In other settings, I used Hermod in a more traditional sense to create a more traditional sort of song structure while still leaning on the chants and ratchet effects that are inside to give the performance a little bit of life. Since Hermod has the ability to mute tracks on the fly and chain sequences, you can lean into more sort of traditional songwriting with it if you want. I actually had a hard time recording this video because every single time I sat down to record something technical with the Hermod, I ended up making a new jam that I just sort of lost myself in. So, nice problem to have, I guess. So let's talk about what's going on the front of Hermod here. On the right, you have 8 channels of CV and gate, which are traditionally used to send 1 volt per octave to a synthesizer, and gate to trigger it in envelopes and other events. You have 4 input modulators that can be assigned to modulate things within the Hermod. You have 2 USB ports, a MIDI out and a MIDI in. And I'm going to be using that MIDI out to sequence the Disting EX when it arrives. Tracks 1 and 2 up here are sent to the 2 oscillators of the Piston Honda wavetable oscillator, and I'm splitting the trig signal off to trigger streams as well to create envelopes. Track 3 is going to plots, and I'm splitting the trig signal off there to go to quart, which is my main envelope generator. Track 5 is going to the Erica Synth's Pico voice, which is right next to quart. It is receiving 1 volt per octave for pitch and a gate signal for trig, and I'm splitting that trig signal out to quart for an envelope generation. Track 6 is sending to the CV and trig of Monsoon, which is a Clouds clone from Afterlater Audio, so I can play it like a pitch instrument if I want. And then track 7 is going to the O Coast by Make Noise, which I traditionally use for bass because it has a wonderful deep bass sound. Track 8 I have set to go into the modulation input A of the Hermod, which means I can set track 8 to an LFO and have it modulate all kinds of parameters within the context of the Hermod's effects. So now we can start from scratch with the Hermod and make something brand new to show off what it can do using the interface here. Are you ready? Let's go. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go to Sequence, and we're going to click the encoder and go to Project, and I'm going to load my template project, which is this little underscore thing. By creating a project with an underscore with settings in it, you create a template project that should load whenever you load a new project. I've had a little bit of issues with it, but generally it works. Each track on the Hermod comes with a MIDI effect as the first effect, and you are going to want to check this out because it's full of a lot of really useful options, like the ability to quantize your recorded input. You can change the root note of the entire track, the fine tune of the entire track. All kinds of really, really useful stuff in here. So I recommend familiarizing yourself with the MIDI effect to see if there's anything in there that you might want to use before or after you start recording. So the way that I have my whole thing set up here is that the KeyStep Pro is providing master clock, which is then sent to Pamela's new workout, which is then sending clock into the Hermod. By pressing play on the KeyStep Pro, I make the entire system start working. MIDI is being sent from the KeyStep Pro into the Hermod directly using the USB host port, and it works like a charm. So we're going to start off by recording a single note from the KeyStep Pro into the Hermod, and then we're going to manipulate it. Okay, there's our single note. Now what can we do with it? Well, we're going to make sure that we're quantized, and indeed we are. And then we're going to go add a harmonizer out of the effects. And what this is going to do is add notes on top of the note that we recorded. What you're going to hear right now is the interval change, but you're not going to hear multiple notes because everything in Eurorack is traditionally monophonic. So let's put this up to like a seventh. We'll put the second one up to an octave. This one, how about like a fourth maybe? And this one up to like a ninth. So now Hermod is generating basically a chord off that bass note that we played. And next, we can add an arpeggiator. So from that single note, Hermod has generated a harmony, multiple intervals, and now the arpeggiator is going through those harmonized notes. Arpeggiator has a lot of different options, and all these are modulatable via the CV inputs on Hermod, which is really, really cool. We're going to adjust some settings here and just adjust the arpeggiator to taste. So now we have a little sequence. Next, we're going to add the chance effect. The chance effect adds a percentage to whether or not each note will play. So we can dial this in and have that arpeggiator that's now being generated from that single note only play, let's say, 70% of the time. Something like that. Anyways, there are a lot of settings in here that you can mess with to dial in your chance settings. Let's go ahead and record something on track 2. Oh, by the way, those effects you're hearing are from the After Later Monsoon. It is being modulated heavily by DivKid's OCHD module, so it's got a bunch of LFOs sort of just sweeping through the different parameters. Cool. So now we're going to add an effect called Euclidean. Euclidean works by telling the pattern to be a certain number of steps and how many steps you want actual note events on within the constraints of those steps. So you can modulate this and have an ever-evolving rhythm pattern, and you can also set it to be offset from the main beat so that you can create sort of polyrhythms, which is really, really cool. Next, we're going to add the random effect. The random effect can generate random pitches from your sequence, or it can generate random octaves. And you can constrain how much the randomness is. So we're going to go in and dial in the range here. On track 3, instead of playing something, we're going to have Hermod generate a pattern by going into step, randomize, randomize pattern. So Hermod can just generate patterns for you if you want, but of course they're going to be like sort of all out of tune a little bit unless you dial it in. We can also change the length of the pattern, and I'm changing it to 15 here, so that it's 15 steps, and it will be slightly offset. And you can see that these little bar designations down there tell you how long your pattern is, where in the pattern that you are, which is really, really useful. So let's go back to 15 and regenerate the pattern to fill all those steps. And to constrain those pitches, we're going to go into our effects next and add a scale effect. Somewhere over here in case I want to add another effect. You can move effects around later if you want by copying and paste them. So I'm going to go in here and make sure that we are in our key. And C major is what we want. Oh, looks like that monsoon is going crazy over there. Let me turn the wet down a little bit. All right, so we are in C major. That's where we want to be. Let's take track 4's CV output and plug it into one of the modulation inputs of Mutable Instruments Platts. That sort of like saw wave thing you're hearing now. Now we can set up track 4 to be a modulation track. Go over to track 4, click into the layout, and change it from mono to modulation. Now you can see it says mod instead of note. So now we can go into the effects for track 4 and go over and add an LFO. And we are going to set this to be a random LFO. So you can see all the options that you have here. We do want it to sync, and we will set up our sync range to something that sounds good to us. And again, all of this can be modulated too. So if you were to plug in a CV input into A, B, C, or D on the screen there, you could have those modulate all the parameters that you're seeing on screen for all of these effects. Another really cool thing that it has built in is glide. You would have to send something to a slew limiter if you wanted to do this otherwise, but it's just built into the Hermod. Not the most musical thing here, but you know, you get the point. Alright, we're going to record something on track 5, but the issue that I have with the Pico voice was that it's really hard to keep in tune. So I had to turn the tuning knob all the way down, which means it's really, really low in octave. So I can go into my MIDI effect and transpose the root note of this track up to a more usable range. Something like maybe 24. Which is very useful to be able to do. That's good for now. Okay, I think we've gotten to the point where I want to add some drums. So let's head on over to the KeyStep Pro and do that. I still use the KeyStep Pro in conjunction with the Hermod to add drums to the QD drum module. You have 8 gate outputs on the KeyStep Pro, and those are really, really useful as drum gates. So the KeyStep Pro is still doing drum duties, as well as master clock and master MIDI controller for all of this. 8 drum gates and really robust step sequencing. It's hard to argue with this in conjunction with using the Hermod. And I just really, really like the way that the whole system works together. Okay, so now that we've made our first sequence, we can make a second sequence. All 4 of these top buttons have a corresponding function with the 1 through 8 buttons on the bottom. So in the case of sequence, it means that we can hit 2 and move to sequence 2, or 3, or 4, or 8. But I think what we're going to do here is we're going to copy sequence 1 and paste it to track 2, and then record a new bass line and see what we can come up with. Cool. So now I can hit track and I can unmute these 3 tracks here. And I don't really like that, so I'm going to remute them. And the Hermod will remember my mute settings as I jump back and forth between sequences. Let's go back to sequence 1. Nice. It's a nice little variation. So by chaining pattern sequences together, you can make, you know, pretty robust songs if you want to. Or you can just change on the fly. It's up to you. So the last thing I want to show you is modulating the Hermod itself with CV inputs. I actually made a track showing this off, so we're going to switch to that in a second. But basically the idea is that every single one of these effects can be messed with in a mod matrix and receive input from MIDI controllers or from the 4 CV inputs to do a variety of things. So let's switch on over to the other track and I'll explain a bit more about how that's working. Let's do that now. So this track I specifically made using as many external modulation sources as possible to modulate the sequence going on within Hermod. Every single track on the Hermod is being modulated by either DivKid's RanStep or Maths by Make Noise. RanStep is sending random voltages in on B and D, and A and C are being modulated by Maths. So we're going to zoom in here, and you'll be able to see that if I go into one of these effects, you're going to see the value of the arpeggiator jumping around because it's being modulated by CV input, which is really cool. Every single effect is being modulated in this sequence, so it's just constantly evolving, which is dope. Because I can send trigs to Maths, I can trigger envelopes which then affect the entire sequence. But I can also loop maths envelopes and turn them into LFOs and play with the rise and fall, which means that I can manipulate the sequence by playing with the voltages of maths, either the rise and fall values, or by swinging the positive and negative amounts for those in maths, I can adjust the amount that's happening. I really want to try this with something like a tetrapad or pressure points, because I think that would be super cool to have hands-on control. This is one of those sequences where, after setting it up, I think I played it for about 30 minutes because everything just was constantly shifting and evolving. And because there were 2 random voltage sources and then 2 timed voltage sources that were adjusting the sequencer parameters, it felt like the system was talking to itself and having a little conversation with me just sort of guiding it, which I think is one of the coolest aspects of modular synthesis. It's really, really fun. If I had any criticisms of Hermod, it would be that I would love to be able to adjust the actual value of incoming CV input within the modulation matrix for each effect, as opposed to just having it be a direct modulation, because it's kind of hard to dial in things sometimes. If you're using the LFO outputs of Hermod, you can adjust the amounts of those LFOs, but it's not quite the same of being able to dial in the amounts per each individual track's effects. I'd also like to see things like chant to ratchet and being able to just modulate effects on and off completely, because sometimes they can be a little out of hand. But all in all, I'm having a blast with Hermod. So I'm going to let this performance play out and end the video. Do you have any cool Hermod tips and tricks? I literally would love to hear them, because I feel like there's a lot that I may not know about Hermod, and I'd like to hear about how you're using it, especially in more experimental ways. So leave a comment. Let me know how you're using Hermod in your setup. Thanks for watching. My name is Jeremy. This is Red Means Recording, and I hope you have a wonderful day.